Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Arts Workshop. My name is Ramon Gill. We've been doing this since 2017. And Jonah was with us at the very first event, Sapolsky, right?
Yes.
Yes, that was our very first one. And we've been going at it ever since. You know, some months we have very few times we don't have something going on, but there's usually something going on, either on a get together but more often than not, it's a guest speaker. So and tonight we have Jonah, who is one of our, like I just mentioned, alumni. And here we are in Chelsea. So if you're in New York, next time we have a live event and you're not here, try to come here because it's more fun when we're all get together. So
Yeah. We got
So-
more people tuning in.
yeah. So anyway, so tonight we have Jonah, who when he started with us, I think were you at Scholastic when you first started? No.
No.
He was not. He was just one of the members. And then he got a job at Scholastic, and now he's one of our distinguished alumni. And we have another guy here who's Glenn, who was also published through, through contacts with Comic Arts Workshop as well, right? So, what happened was we had a guest speaker who Jessica Bagnula, I can't remember her whole name. Generally. And her husband was an editor, and I was looking for people, and Glenn answered the call. So, anyways, let's get started. The first question is, I'm going to let Jonah introduce himself and tell us about his career path and his background and his training.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonah Newman. I am a cartoonist and editor. This book right here, called Out of Left Field, is my debut book. It just came out from Andrews McMeel last week. I wrote and illustrated it. And I don't have or I don't have much official or formal artistic training. I did not go to art school. I did take a handful of comics classes. I took one while I was an undergrad at RISD. That was confusing. I took one at RISD while I was studying at a school that was not RISD. And then here in New York, I took two at the School of Visual Arts in the continuing ed department. And all three of those classes were really helpful for me artistically, but my drawing ability is just from having done it since I was a kid and just practice, essentially.
Well, what was your major then?
History.
History. Oh.
History. Yeah. And the other side of my career as an editor, I work at Scholastic at the graphics imprint. So the kids' graphic novel imprint there. And I got my job at Scholastic in 2018, and I was hired to work on picture books, actually. But I kind of slowly weaseled my way over into graphic novels because my boss, Ken Geist, is Dave Pilkey's editor. So he brought me on to help with Dave Pilkey's publishing program, which is published under the graphics imprint. And that was my way that was the first graphic novel project I worked on. And I started to do more and more. I started to work with David Saylor, the founder and publisher of the graphics imprint as well. And at this point, I would say the majority of what I do, the vast majority of what I do is graphics. I still work on Pilkey Publishing. Dave Pilkey actually gave me a very nice blurb on this book, which was super nice of him. He's in addition to a ridiculously successful creator, he's just the nicest guy. And he doesn't blurb everything that he's asked to blurb. So it was really flattering for me that he gave me that honor.
For those of you who don't know who Dave Pilkey is, he's the author of Captain Underpants and Dogman.
And a new Dogman book came out 2 weeks ago, and it's already sold 400,000 copies.
Ooh.
So that's wild. My editor at Andrews McMeel today sent me an email and said, congrats on a strong first week of sales. But, compared to Dave Pilkey, like, this is a huge flop. Like, nobody sells.
It's not a flop. You got it done.
I got it done. Yeah.
Your first time published author, right?
Yeah. No, there's a lot to be happy about. I'm just saying, Dave Pilkey is just on another level of
How many books has Dave put out?
Well, he's put out, man, 12 Dogman books, 5 Cat Cake Comic Club books, 12 Captain Underpants books,
There you go.
a bunch of, some
Over how
readers,
many
a bunch of
years? Like when did
books.
they first get published?
Almost 40 years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that long ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I think his first book was 1987 or 88. So yeah,
Okay.
that's true. Check in with me in 40 years, and maybe I'll be at Dave Cookie's level.
Okay, so enough about Dave. Let's talk about you. How did you get first interested in graphic novels, and what made you decide to do it as a career?
I would say probably high school is when I first got into graphic novels. I always loved comics. I used to read comics in the Sunday paper, the strips were a lot of fun for me to read when I was a kid. And those are the first comics that I made, were just like single, like 3 or 4 panel things with like a gag at the end. But in high school, I started to read graphic novels, and the earliest ones I read were Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, which remains maybe my #1 favorite book, and Mouse by Art Spiegelman, Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. Those are kind of like, I kind of call them the holy trinity of graphic novels / graphic memoirs, because they were really groundbreaking books, and got me into the category. And I feel like many others, that's, one or all of those books is their entry point into the format, or maybe for some people, it's like the only graphic novel or comic style book that they read. So those 3 books are just wonderful. And that's how I got into the format. But I didn't really pursue making graphic novels seriously until after college. I started to work on a historical fiction graphic novel that took me like 6 years, ended up getting published as a webcomic because I was not able to find a publisher for it. I was actually ignored or rejected by every single agent and publisher I submitted to. So that says something about persistence, I guess, but it also...
You draw that too?
Yes, I did. And it also says a lot about improvement over time. Like I think there are lots of reasons why that book didn't get published. Mainly it just wasn't that good. But my art has come a long way. I got a lot smarter about kind of like, with the help of my publishing day job, I learned how to position something in a way that would be more marketable. And I also think that just like the topic of the book compared to the topic of this book, this is a lot more of a commercial kind of idea. And this is a lot more similar to a lot of the graphic novels that are being published now, whereas a historical fiction epic set in a really nerdy niche period of history is maybe not what the masses are looking for right now.
I don't know. I feel like there are a lot of historical.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I don't know. I would have to look more into all of the comps and to see how they've done.
Would you say that right now there's a trend towards memoirs?
I would say there's definitely a trend towards queer content. It almost feels in some ways like there are more queer cartoonists than not these days, at least in the graphic novel. Like in the kids' graphic novel world, queer stories and queer creators, there's tons and tons of them, which is great.
I felt that at last year's SPX.
Yeah,
there's a lot of queer content being put out at SPX last year, which I felt like wasn't really the case in previous SPXs. SPX meaning Small Press Expo down in Bethesda.
Yeah, and the indie comics into graphic novels pipeline is definitely there. I mean, so many people who are now huge names in the graphic novel space, the kids graphic novel space, like Raina Telgemeier and Jean Luen Yang, started out as like indie comics people making their own zines and selling them at places like SPX and TCAF. And now they're, multi, or at least hundreds of thousands of copies selling, maybe even millions of copies selling titans in this space. So there's always been, it seems to me like there's always been a lot more connection between the indie comics and the self-published world and the graphic novel world than between the superhero comics world and the graphic novel world. Like I don't see as many superhero comics people getting book deals and working on graphic novels published by major publishers.
Question for you. Looking back at that first webcomic that you created, looking back on it with the eyes that you have now as an editor, what was wrong with it?
I think it was too text heavy. I think there was not nearly enough character development. I don't think the characters had very much emotion or character.
Mhm.
I think the drawing was kind of stilted and rigid compared to what I can do now. Um, and I think like things just kind of happened, like it took me so long to make that it felt truly like an epic to me because comics take so long to make. Like anyone who makes comics or who reads comics in an informed way, how long it takes to draw a page, and someone can read that page in seconds. So from my perspective as a creator, I was like, oh yes, years are passing, because they actually were passing when I was making this book. But the book is only like 160 pages long. And I reread it somewhat recently just to kind of see, after all these years removed from it, what it would feel like. And it was like, oh wow, like that happened fast. And oh, we're suddenly in another country, and like how did that happen and why. So it was kind of like a roller coaster ride that didn't feel necessarily earned. So those are my critiques of it, but it was really, really important for me to make for several reasons. Number one, just the persistence and the discipline of actually getting it done, even when I knew it was not going to be published. And I worked on a good chunk of it while in this comics class at the School of Visual Arts. And being in that class and, having to draw a few pages every single week to show my classmates and my teacher was a really, really good exercise for my building discipline. So that was one thing. My drawing ability just got a lot better, like almost purely because of practice, but also because of some of the insights I had in that class. Like that teacher taught me how to draw in perspective, for example. And then from the writing and storytelling perspective, same thing. It was just like, because I remember retroactively grafting a lot of stuff onto that book, or at least trying to. Like once I realized there were these storytelling issues, I went back and I made like new pages to try to establish the backstories of the characters a little bit more and their relationships and personalities a little bit more. It was too little, too late, but just doing that and thinking about that set me up where for my next project, I was thinking about that stuff from the very beginning, and I was spending a lot more time on the back end making the story super solid before starting to write and draw it.
So that's a great segue to my next question. So when you decided to do Out of Left Field, I'm assuming it was a pitch first before you actually did the book, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you did the pitch, did you consciously have a checklist of things you're going to do differently compared to the webcomic, or was it more of an organic thing?
I would say it was more of an organic thing. That was another problem with the historical fiction thing, was I didn't submit it to anyone until it was, I don't know, maybe 2/3 done. And, graphic novel editors don't want to see a project that's that close to done. I would say the maximum number of pages that you want to have done before you pitch something is like 30. And I have seen graphic novels be pitched and acquired with many fewer pages than that. What's most important is that the editor can see what your drawing style is. They can see what your ability to tell a story in the comics medium is like. And of course, a synopsis so that they know where the story is going is a big part of it too. And one thing that was successful for me with this book was I made a whole like pitch deck. I put a lot of thought into the design. I filled it with artwork. I had, artwork of the characters. I had excerpts of the pages I had drawn for the pitch. I had a full plot synopsis. I had an author's note. I had a list of comparative titles. I had my elevator pitch. Like I had all of the things that made it very, very easy for editors to not only to get a sense of it, but to actually then pitch it to the salespeople and the executives at these publishers who actually make these decisions.
Did you have a pitch for the historical nonfiction?
No, that was just like, I tried to find submission guidelines online. So most agents take unsolicited submissions, and they'll just like list the guidelines on their website. So for the most part, I was just looking up these agents that I had heard of because I knew that they represented different graphic novel creators and following their guidelines. And sometimes it was like, send us the 20 pages as an attachment. Sometimes it was,
So it wasn't an actual structured pitch. It was just you sending.
yeah, well, they specified different things. Some of them it was like, fill out this online form. Some of them it was, send us an email that includes these things. Some of them was, well, we don't want an attachment at all. We would prefer a link. And then I had to post the PDF somewhere and send them a link to it. So it was all like a little bit different, but I did not make a pitch deck in the same way that I did for Out of Left Field. And I think being in publishing for, at that point, not that long, it was maybe only a year that I'd been in publishing at that point, but I had been in publishing for long enough and I had gone to enough acquisitions meetings just as an observer to have seen, what is successful.
What works.
Right. So it was a really, really valuable experience for me and has remained so. I mean, the technical skills I've learned working at a real graphic novel imprint, seeing how those designers work with their Photoshop and InDesign files. Just to name one thing, in addition to all of the fantastic editorial expertise I've absorbed, that was great. And I think that it made this much easier for my publisher to deal with because I was like, here's a PSD with a template and bleed, and it's properly layered, and it's in the CMYK color space. When I was working on the historical fiction graphic novel, each page was a single flat JPEG in the RGB color space. And then later on, I deleted the handwritten text and I put in typed text, but the balloons were still like flat with the artwork and none of it was editable. And so editing even a really small part of it was an enormous amount of work. I didn't even have a tablet for a while. Like I was literally like drawing lines with a mouse to make corrections. It was just a disaster. So it's a good thing I don't have to do that anymore.
I was talking to after last time we had Jamar Nicholas as our guest. It was the second time. And the next day we actually talked on the phone. He said, yeah, it's hard to pitch a book that's already done. Because but he said, but coming from mainstream comics, we finish things, right? The tendency for self-publishers or for people doing is we just finish the project. So it's a weird thing to go to traditional publishers and that they're expecting work that's not done. They just want to pitch the first 10 pages. So it's almost like we shoot ourselves in the foot because we finish things.
Yeah.
And then they don't want to touch it anymore because it's done. But luckily, I have all my layers.
Yeah. And like nobody tells you these things unless you go to talks like this. Nobody's going to tell you these kind of like inner secrets of how books get published and what expectations editors have in different spaces. I should also say that I work with Jamar at Scholastic, and I edit his Leon series, and he's wonderful. He's one of my favorite.
Were you part of his acquisition?
Kind of. So my boss, David Saylor, officially acquired Jamar's books at auction back in 2020. Yeah, so Jamar did quite well for himself with those 3 books.
But when they acquired him, they specifically wanted him to create future Leon books, not to publish his first one.
Correct. Yeah, because he had a book, Leon Protector of the Playground, that he had self-published and was selling at comic shows and getting a really good response on. But we were not interested in publishing that book. We wanted him to make new books, and not only that, we wanted him to take that book off the market at a certain point so that it wouldn't compete with the Scholastic titles.
Got it.
So Jamar has now come out with one book, Leon the Extraordinary. The second book actually just went to print like today, or the proofs were finalized today. Literally, I was doing this, like at my desk at Scholastic earlier today. That book's coming out in October, and he's working on the 3rd book now. So, but yeah, it's just a total sweetheart and one of my favorite authors to work with.
One more question about Jamar's acquisition. Did the strength of the first book, though you did not decide not to publish it, had any bearing on you guys acquiring him as an author?
Yeah, I think so. I think seeing how the book resonated with audiences and seeing the way that kids responded to it. I mean, like I remember seeing a picture of a kid, dressed up like Leon posing with Jamar at a comic show or a library or something. So seeing that, like, the way that that resonated at like a grassroots level with kids was part of it. Knowing that Jamar was a veteran creator, was also a veteran self-promoter was part of it. And he did a lot of events to support Leon the Extraordinary. We sent him all over the country. We sent him to, American Library Association and Booksellers Association conferences. I think New York and or San Diego Comic-Con. Partially because we had invested a lot in this book, we really believed in it, but also because like we knew that Jamar was good for that kind of stuff and had been doing events for himself for years. So it wasn't a mistake for Jamar to make that book himself. I think that it played a big role in getting him that big deal at a major publisher.
Okay. As a side note, I'm doing the same thing. So. Anyways, you mentioned earlier that you had followed the submission guidelines for agents when you're doing the historical non-fiction book. But when you're looking for an agent for out, I'm assuming you did another effort to find an agent. What kind of efforts did you do? Did you have to do?
Well, this one, it's the story of the agent for this book is longer and more complicated. I'm not going to get into the whole thing here, but I actually had two agents for this. The first agent I had for this was someone I met at a young people in publishing party that I was invited to. So this was another way in which my being in publishing helped me out. But I also want to emphasize, like, it is not necessary to, what I've heard about an industry like Hollywood is that you really do have to know people, and they really don't take cold calls or cold submissions of any kind. Book publishing isn't like that. Most agents will take cold submissions. And I don't think that you are necessarily less likely to get an agent if you cold call people than if you know somebody. But in this particular case, I was invited to this party because I worked in the industry, and I met this agent there, and we got to talking, and I told him about Out of Left Field, which at this point was kind of just an idea. Showed him some of the art for it, some of the sketches I'd been doing, and he really liked it. So he said, when it's ready, send it to me. So I did. And he took me on and ran an auction for this book. There were 6 publishers bidding, which was awesome. And again, like I don't want to get too much into the circumstances, but the book was dropped by the first publisher, the publisher that originally acquired it. My agent also let me go. So I had to kind of scramble to find a new home for it and a new representative. And Dave Pilkey, who I worked with at Scholastic, saw some of my artwork on Twitter and was like, oh, this looks great. I really want to see this published. And I said, well, if I do need some help right now. And so he connected me with his agent, who then went and found a new home for this book at Andrews McMeel. And so she still represents me now. And my next book, she's managing my next book as well, which is with Andrews McMeel currently. And if this sells well, they will hopefully buy the next one.
Is the next book similar or in similar vein?
It is, yeah. It's another YA graphic novel. I kind of deliberated on it for a while. I was playing with some genre stuff for it. But in the end, I basically decided to come back to the realistic, grounded sort of teen coming of age story, just because partially for creative and partially for strategic reasons. Creatively, I think I was struggling to make the genre stuff fit. It was always going to be like about and starring teenagers, but I was working like horror stuff into there. I was working some fantasy stuff into there. And it just wasn't really gelling. And I sent these proposals to my agent. She was like, I don't really see it, but maybe it's just not my thing. And I also talked to some other friends in publishing, and the conclusion that I came to was like, okay, one, I wasn't really making this work as a story. And two, I have just started to carve out a little space with this book. And it would be a mistake to pivot to a different genre or even a different audience, even worse, with the second book. establishing yourself with book one is hard enough, but I think book two is actually harder than book one because people will take chances on debut creators. Sometimes huge chances. I mean, debut creators are flashy, and it's very easy for many publishers to talk themselves into like, oh, we found, the next big thing. We found this like brilliant up and coming creator. And sometimes you see debut creators. I mean, like this book was an auction originally. I had kind of that debut sparkle, I guess, because I hadn't had a chance to fail yet. You know. And once you have a book out, you have a sales track, you have something that the publisher can compare to. And so if your first book does not do really well, I think it's very difficult for the publisher to invest in you again. Or maybe they will, but they won't invest quite as highly. And I see this a lot. I see higher advances being paid for debut unproven books than for second or third books from the same creator, unless the debut book was like a smash hit, which very few books are. I mean, I should say that like 90% of all books sell under 2,000 copies. There's people like David Kilkey who are like huge outliers and massive successes that basically pay for all of the other books that the publisher is investing in and which are losing money. But the truth is most books lose money and most books don't make up the investment that the publisher made. And so as a result of that, if you're a second or third time creator, sometimes it's hard to get as much money or even any money in any deal at all from a publisher. I think a lot of people when they're like, oh, I want to get published, that's great. And when you do get published, it's a great feeling. I'm really happy with how this turned out and how this is going, but it doesn't mean that I'm like set up forever and I'm just going to be published forevermore, right? Like every book is a new decision and a new investment on the part of the publisher, and it's a business. So they're looking at sales, and that's just the hard truth of it.
We're already halfway through and I'm only on my third question.
I'm talking too much.
No, it's okay. It's okay. And just realize some of these questions are kind of generic anyways. So I'll ask you one more question. I'll open up to the audience. And if they have no questions, I'll go through the symbol. So your book is about being a queer athlete. Do you feel that this book might not have been as well received 5, 10, or 15 years ago?
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to what I said about all of the queer creators and queer content in graphic novels today, this is just like a hugely, how do I word this? I do think that publishers are so much more willing to invest in this kind of creator and story than they were years ago. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in some ways I was lucky with timing with this because I didn't make this book thinking, oh, how am I going to sell it? Like, I made it because I was passionate about it and I wanted to make it. And I essentially wanted to make it ever since I graduated high school. It's based on my high school experiences, and I've been inspired to make a story like this for years and years. But when I happened to have it ready, the publishing industry was in a space where they were really excited about queer content and queer stories. So, and I had just gotten better as a creator. So my artwork and storytelling and writing had gotten to a point where I think more publishers were taking notice.
Perfect time all around.
Yeah, exactly. It just, things aligned really nicely. And now who knows? Now it's like I just have to sell, and we'll see if the timing and everything else aligns with the next book. But there's no way to know just yet.
Very clever title.
Thank you.
Did you come up with that one, or did
I came up with it? It's funny, the historical project did not come up with a title until like the very end. And even then I was like, I don't really know about this title. I ended up calling it Empire on Edge. And still it's like, I don't know. But I was like, I finished it, I better call it something. So that's what I called it. And this book, like the title was like the very first thing that I thought of. Literally, you can go back to my brainstorm document. I have this 80-page, 40,000 Word document, which essentially was just like the place for me to put my word vomit. Like whenever I needed to work through a story issue or work out a rough synopsis or just kind of brainstorm with myself, that's what that document is for. And at the very top of that document, it says like out of the field. It's like,
now here's a question. Now I'm going to question your authenticity. Did you play left field?
Yes, I did.
Okay, there you go. Okay, questions for me, guys? Anybody? Glenn?
Okay, so I mean, I guess my questions are about how the books get produced, because I mean, a lot of people aren't aware of how long it takes to go from pitch to, and then the production of it, and then how long it takes to get actually printed and edited and all that. So when was your, like, how many years ago was your first pitch for?
Everybody heard the question? You guys heard the question?
Yeah.
So it was pitched in January 2020. And then, yeah, sold in, I think, early February. And then, of course, a month after that, COVID hit. And, you know, I was at that point working on the script, worked on that for the spring and early summer. And then I started to pencil the book in July. Excuse me. And I spent a year penciling. This book is like 300 pages, by the way. So I think it's 280 something pages of comics. And I drew all of it in a year, essentially, like
Wow.
I think July 2020 to July 2021. But you know, we were all at home. We had nothing to do. So
it's like 1.2 pages a day or something.
yeah. And then, you know, there were days when I did like 4 or 5 pages because I was just in the zone and I had nothing else to do. And it's like a muscle, you know, drawing is, I mean, it literally is a physical activity. And I think the more you do it, the easier it gets, the easier it becomes to get into the zone. And, you know, when I was in the zone with drawing, it was like I was completely fixated on it and there was nothing else that I wanted to do. Like I would just be eager to get back to drawing as soon as humanly possible. And that was a really cool space to be in. I don't think I'm in that space anymore, you know, like doing a lot of other things. And when it comes time to work on the next book, I'm gonna have to probably work hard to break through that like wall of procrastination and not being as sharp and get back to that like drawing flow that I was in.
Did you have scholastic duties while you were drawing this during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I drew the whole book working full time. Now I was working from home because the pandemic, so no commute. That made things easier. No social life really, that made things easier. But yes, I was working full time and also drawing like almost 300 pages of comics a year. And from there, I moved on to the inks, and that took me, God, like maybe a year and a half. And I was just going over so I pencil on paper, scan that, and then ink digitally. So I was doing the inks and laying out the lettering as well. So the lettering in this book is in a font based on my handwriting. Let me see if I can show the people in the audience like a typical page.
I'll hold it up.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the balloons I drew on my tablet along with the line art, and the text I laid out in Photoshop. And it's in a font based on my handwriting. I worked with a guy named John Martz, who we've worked with at Scholastic, and who is kind of a specialist in this kind of thing. And he basically sends you a template and you write your letters on it, and then he turns that into a font for you. So that's how I did the lettering. And then the coloring, luckily I did, the publisher did for me. So I turned in the inked pages, and a woman named Donna Oatney, who works at Andrews McMeel, did an amazing job of coloring based on guides and resources I had given her. And then that process took maybe 6 months. So I finished inking in March of last year. Then over the next 6 months, it was like Donna was sending me batches of pages of color. I was giving her notes on those. She was making corrections. And then we kind of like went through that cycle a bunch of times.
So you finished the art around March of 2023.
Yeah.
And then but you signed on prior to the pandemic in 2020?
Yeah. So the book was sold in, let me just recap that. The book was sold in February 2020. was written in, I would say first half of 2020. And a lot of these phases are overlapping, I should also say. Like when I was in the penciling phase, I got editorial feedback, and based on that, I redrew some stuff and I moved some things around. So all of these things were very fluid, but essentially it was like, it was sold, I wrote it, I wrote the script, then I took a year to pencil it, then I took a year and a half to ink it, and then it was 6 months for color, and then like 5 or 6 months after that, the book came out because it was printed overseas, and that process takes several months.
That's scary. I get bored if something takes too long.
Well, that's comics. Like you can read this book in an hour or two.
Yeah.
And it took 6 years from the beginning of when I started to work on it until when it came out.
Okay, does that answer your question?
I have a question.
Pretty good summation of most of my questions. Yeah.
Anybody have any questions on?
Yes.
Yes, Yvonne, go ahead.
It's a two-parter. This is so amazing. This is great, really helpful. I am a playwright who had an idea for a graphic novel, which I started writing over 3 years ago, probably longer. And I always dabbled in cartoons. I started right before the pandemic, drawing the cartoons to the story. I've been studying with Josh Baer. I don't know if he's an animal. So anyway, so I'm on my third draft, and I'm just to tell you where I'm at. But my question is, and you sort of answered it. I have two part agents. I've been doing the research and submission guidelines for agents and publishers. Does it matter which one to go to?
I would say go to agents, prioritize that, because you are going to have a much easier time reaching publishers through an agent than you would by yourself. Some publishers will not take submissions without an agent at all.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, agents understand contracts and they understand publishing agreements. And these are things that almost no authors understand on their own. So sort of not only to give yourself access to publishers, but if a publisher is interested, an agent will help make sure that you don't get taken advantage of and that you don't sell more rights than you should be selling.
Right.
Yeah. And it's also it's just easier. It's like, you know, as I said before, many, if not most agents will take submissions from anyone, whereas most publishers, I would say, will not. So you just have so much better, you have so many more options when you're submitting to agents than when you're submitting to publishers without an agent.
Did your agent help give you notes on your pitch?
Yeah, definitely. That was part of it too. Yeah, my first agent did help with the notes on the pitch. We went back and forth a couple of rounds on the synopsis before I even put together the pitch packet. So a lot of agents will help editorially as well. I think the best ones do help editorially.
Okay.
Part
Anybody
two.
have a question?
Part two.
Oh, part two.
If I may. So I've been hand drawing everything. Is that like okay while I'm pitching? And would it be a good idea to start learning like Procreate, or, you know, because all the tech stuff you're talking about is very foreign to me, you know. So I wonder, as a new artist, first time graphic novel author, what would you recommend?
I have seen, you know, creators be published illustrating traditionally. And I would say at this point, most creators illustrate digitally, but not fully digitally sometimes. Like there are creators who pencil digitally and then print out their pages and then ink on paper and then scan that back in, and that's their art.
That's me. I ink and pencil.
Yeah, and there are some people who ink and pencil on paper and then color digitally. That's actually what I did with Empire on Edge. And then there are creators like me who pencil traditionally and then ink digitally. So there's a lot of ways of doing it. And as I said, there are people who do 100% traditionally, and then maybe they scan in the pages and they only do the lettering digitally. I think it's quite hard. It's not impossible, but it's quite hard to do lettering traditionally. It just makes it so much harder to edit. So I think like at baseline, illustrate traditionally, maybe do the balloons traditionally on paper, then scan it in and like add layers of text on the computer.
Did you letter the book yourself?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that thing in your handwriting sounds amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't need to do it exactly the way that I did it. Before I worked with this guy, John Martz, I used this program called Calligrapher, which is spelled how you think it would be spelled, but without the E, so calligrapher, because it's one of those cutesy tech things. But anyway, it's a free program where you can download a template, put in your letters, upload the template, and then it will create the font for you. Actually, maybe it's not free, but it's like pretty cheap. It's like, at least when I used it, I feel like it was like $8 for a 6-month license or something like that. So worth looking into that, or there are probably similar programs that do the same thing. I do think it would be worth your time to learn a program like Procreate for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're really comfortable working traditionally and that's just the best way that you can work, and you're comfortable with things being potentially harder to edit later, I think that's great. I don't think it's impossible to succeed like that by any means.
Cool. Thank you so much.
I recently, about 2 years ago, I graduated my master's in illustration, and for the entire course of the program, I was trying to get my digital drawing skills done right. And when I was doing my final visual thesis, I kept telling the instructor, I just don't like it, and he says, "Well, fuck it, do it traditionally." So I did everything traditionally, and I finished it, and I like it much better.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I just have, and it could just be that I haven't practiced enough. Like you can get better, you can do anything with practice. Like I have tried to pencil digitally, but I just don't get the same feel with it. It's something about the feeling of the paper and the graphite and I don't know, like this area of my hand being totally smeared with gray. Like there's just something about it where it's just easier for me to get into the zone and feel out the artwork better. But I am so glad that I changed to digital inks because it is so much easier to edit. Um, it's easier to make like little micro edits too. It's like, oh, I didn't draw that line totally how I wanted. Let me just erase it or undo it and do it again. Whereas if I had laid down that line in ink, it would have been so much more time consuming to edit. And just being able to move things around on the page is awesome. Like there are times where I will pencil a panel and then I'll realize after I scan it in and start to add the lettering, oh, I haven't given myself enough space for this lettering. So I can literally like shrink the panel down in Photoshop, or shrink that part of the pencils layer down, I should say, and then ink on top of that. Whereas if I had inked traditionally, then scanned it in and then tried to edit it, like there would have been line thickness issues potentially, and it just would have been harder.
What would you say that, aside from the production advantages, that the publishers don't care either way if you're traditional or digital?
I don't think that they do. I think it's more just about the quality of the work. At least in my experience, like I can only speak for one publisher though. I think designers probably do prefer digital because it's just easier to work with. But if the work is good and the publisher wants to publish it, I think most publishers are just going to say, do your thing and do what works for you. Again, like provided the text is editable, that's probably the most important thing. I would not really recommend hand lettering text on paper and then scanning that. You can still get a really good personal, if you create your own font like I did, you can have all of the benefits of digital lettering and all of the editability of that, but without losing kind of like the handwritten style and the personalization of actually handwriting your own text.
Interesting.
Any other questions, guys? No other questions? Glenn, you have another question?
Actually, I just wanted to chime in on the production thing, as pretty much I just happen to be. Hello. I happen to be have worked in comics production for about 10 years now. So it doesn't really matter if you work traditionally as long as the artwork is big enough and it can be scanned in. And the production people will be able to sort out the files and everything for you. I mean, obviously digital is more convenient, but it's not impossible by any means to work with traditional artwork. So,
Yeah, worth flagging that.
Thank you.
Glenn said about the size, like 600 DPI, probably.
yeah, I mean, basically, the bigger your artwork is physically, the easier it will be to convert into a book. So
Thank you.
you work at like say 11 by 14, that's a lot easier to work with than if you draw on like let's say half a page size.
And this, each of these pages was drawn on a 9 by 12 piece of Bristol board. So the trim size of the book is 6 by 9 inches, but it was drawn a little bit bigger than that. And essentially I just measured like the correct, because the aspect ratio is very slightly different on like a 9 by 12 is 3 by 4, whereas 6 by 9 is 2 by 3, right? So I did have to kind of like measure, and I'm also thinking about like the limitations of my scanner. Like I don't have a scanner that will fit an entire 6 by 9 sheet of paper. It will get most of it, but not all of it. So I had to like trim a little bit off of the top and bottom edges and then a bit more off of the side edge. And then that was my, 6 by 9 page that I was drawing on. So thinking about that kind of stuff is important. That's not something that you necessarily would have answers to when you're just making a pitch. But if you do get a book deal, one of the first questions you should ask your publisher is, what's the template? What's the trim size? Can I get some resources to make sure that I'm drawing at the correct size?
Okay, do you have another question?
Yeah, the other question I had was, how much did the final story change from pitch to, I guess, the finished products? Like, how many editorial decisions, like plot lines or different scenes that were going to be problematic? Because your book is targeted at a certain age range, so there would be, some things that would get cut or might. So, like, how much did that change?
Yeah, it changed a lot. Originally the book was a memoir, so it was just nonfiction. And as I worked on it, with partially because of editorial feedback from my agent, my editor, my partner who also works in publishing and is an amazing editor himself. I basically pushed it farther and farther from memoir to try to make it a stronger story and to do a better job of capturing the emotions that I wanted to capture. My goal was to capture and convey the emotional truth of my high school experiences. And real life is very messy. And, real life rarely resonates as much for other people as it resonates for you. Like nobody's really going to care about life unless you make them care or you present it in a way that is relatable or easy to connect with. So I kind of had that in mind, and I made more and more changes to the point where I could no longer call it a memoir. Now I'm calling it semi-autobiographical fiction. A lot of it is still true. I can not here, but I can go basically page by page and be like, that's true, that's made up, that's exaggerated, that, I compressed that a little bit, I rearranged. Like there's all sorts of little micro decisions that happened. But I would say, Glenn, it was just more of like an organic process than a rewrite A, rewrite A.1, rewrite B. Like it was like almost day by day, I was making little adjustments and it was kind of morphing to the point where it took the shape that it has taken now. But even in the pencils phase, when I wanted it to be like, quote unquote, done, like when I was penciling, I wanted to say, okay, here's the script is done. I'm going to pencil the script and just execute from here on out. It didn't really work like that because I got editorial feedback on the script. I remember one scene where my editor said, it's really moving too fast. You need to like add a little bit more space and slow down a little bit here. So I added another spread or two of artwork where I kind of slowed down that moment. And I think it was really important. But, you know, it was kind of annoying to have to draw more pages than I had planned to draw. But it made it a better book. And that was always that was always like at the forefront of my mind, was like, how can I make this the best possible book? I will work as hard as I have to work and make the adjustments I have to make that happen.
Did you ever have to stand your ground on some notes?
Thinking about that. I'm not really a stand your grounder. It might just be because I'm an editor also, and because like I believe that editors know what they're doing and have the best interests of the book at heart. I also believe that publishing is a team sport and it's very collaborative, and it turns out best when everybody is contributing. And I also believe that nobody can be objective about their own work ever. Like I can look at somebody else's work in my capacity as an editor and be like, I know exactly what to do with this. This is the issue. I have a really strong idea about how to fix it. But I cannot do that with my own work. I just know I'm not capable of that. So when somebody else points something out to me, my response is usually like, wow, that is an amazing point. You know, I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to realize that. And now I can almost go into editor mode a bit and be like, okay, the issue has been pointed out. How would I fix it? And that's much easier for me to do than to actually spot the issues in the first place.
Okay, now I know that when you're thinking of your next book, you were thinking about trying to play with the genre a bit, right? But is there something a genre you really want to try down the line, maybe, or something you really want to sink your teeth into?
Good question. I was actually really enjoying playing with horror in earlier versions of this next book. Didn't really work for this particular story, I get it, but I was having a lot of fun like watching horror movies and TV shows and kind of trying to understand the genre a bit better, because I was never someone who liked horror movies growing up. I still haven't watched very many, but at this point I've like watched enough because I started to watch them to try to educate myself to make this book. Basically, I was like, I want to bring this in, but I don't really know anything about it. So let me learn about it and take in some of that content. And I don't know, I just found it really fun, like especially like horror comedy. Like I watched Get Out, and I watched Jennifer's Body, and I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 1. And like these were all just like such fun movies to watch, like truly enjoyable movies and shows. And that was kind of the tone I was originally going for with this book. So I would like to maybe come back to that at some point, because I felt like it was fun and I felt like it was a real creative challenge, because it was a genre I had not really been exposed to that much.
Now, I've heard you and the guys talk superhero continuity. Any desire to write superhero comic books?
Not really. I guess if Marvel or DC approached me and was like, we want you to do this, I would probably embrace the opportunity, because you know how many people are lucky enough to do that. But it just seems very daunting. Like I don't even think I saw all the Avengers movies. Like I've watched maybe 5 or 6 MCU movies in total. I never really read Marvel and DC as a kid. I just feel like in order to do that well, I would have to learn so much about the world and the characters and the continuity, that it would just be very daunting for me, because I wouldn't want to just like go in and assume, oh, well, I know how to write Batman, obviously, like without having read any Batman. Like, so I would just have to do so much homework to do justice to it. And so I just don't know if I'm definitely not the right person for it. And so it's not something I've ever really chased.
Well, that's what Marvel and DC never sees this interview. Okay, last chance for questions. If not, I'm going to ask my last question, and then we're going to close it out. You guys are okay? Okay. Last question. Where can people find you, and where can they buy the book?
You can buy the book anywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, indie bookstores, even like some wholesalers might even have it. I've gotten some really wonderful like pictures from people who have spotted it at different bookstores and comic shops. So that's really cool. So working with a publisher is great for a lot of reasons, but maybe like the best part is that you don't have to distribute your own book. They'll just do that for you. Like they'll warehouse it and ship it and put it into stores. Like that's awesome. So yeah, I would say I'm a big fan of indie bookstores. And there's no time, but you know, Amazon is not great for the publishing industry. So I would say you can order this on Amazon, but if you can buy it from your local bookstore, please do that. Even Barnes and Noble is better than Amazon. You can order it online from any of these places. And as for where to find me, I'm just gonna put this up to the camera real quick. But this is my business card, and it has my website and my social media handles. But yeah, JonahNewmanComics.com. It's all linked from there. And yeah, I'm on I think, Twitter, which I refuse to call X, Instagram, Blue Sky,
So
Facebook.
weird.
Yeah, I also have an email newsletter, which you know I don't email people a ton, but that's a good way for me to send out news as well.
Awesome. So I think, oh gosh, let me just look really quickly. Before I close out, let me just remind you guys what's coming up next. So we have, you know, I had all these creators who were saying yes, and I didn't want
Oh,
to
check it out.
stretch it out to like August, September.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
started booking them twice a month.
Nice.
So next month it's going to be twice a month. So we have Enrico Jang, who publishes horror comic
Oh yeah.
on the 15th of this month. And then Paul Kupperberg, who's a longtime DC guy, we'll be talking about, because he started as a fan, writing fanzines to become a creator.
Yeah.
So I just want to explore how that worked. And then we have Hunter Goranson, who is the publisher of Oni Press on May 16th.
I haven't gotten Hunter Goranson in my calendar. I gotta add him.
And we have Joan Hilty after that, who is well, she's a cartoon editor and educator, but she works at an animation studio. She used to be at Nickelodeon. Now she's at a place called Avatar Studios. So I think she's going to be a good person. And I've got a couple other people who I'm just waiting on confirmations. But it's going to be a busy next 2 months as far as our events. But thanks everybody, and everything is on the meetup page. So yeah,
I want to say thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Raman, for this wonderful talk. I want to appreciate this with this little drawing I made.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. Super helpful, super great, and good luck.
You have to send that. You have to send that now.
Huh?
I love that.
Yeah,
Send it to them.
definitely.
It's amazing.
Yeah, but it's missing the better looking guy.
Of
Okay,
course.
guys, this will get posted probably in the next couple of weeks. I've been much better at posting these recordings, and hopefully I'll see you guys at the next one. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.